The silk against your skin feels too heavy, too warm. Eunuch dressed in crimson robes glances back at you, his eyes unreadable, and you realize with sudden clarity that you're being led somewhere you cannot return from unchanged. The air smells of rosewater and something else, something metallic and ancient that makes your throat tighten. In your hand, folded so small it cuts into your palm, is a piece of paper. On it, written in elegant script, are 3 rules. Break even one, and you will never see dawn again. This is not a palace. It is a machine, and tonight you are about to learn how it works. I have to tell you, it still amazes me that a story this hidden, this intimate, reaches people in every corner of the world. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from, because knowing this connects us across centuries and continents makes every second of research worth it. The year is 1530. The place is Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, the beating heart of the Ottoman Empire, and behind its towering walls lies the most controlled, most feared, and most misunderstood institution in the Islamic world, the Imperial Harem. But this is not the fantasy Westerners imagined in their paintings and novels. This is not silk and seduction. This is survival. The women inside were not lovers. They were assets. Their bodies were instruments of dynasty. Their nights entries in a ledger, their desires punishable by death. What you are about to hear comes from palace archives, from the diaries of foreign ambassadors who bribed their way into fragments of truth, and from the few women who lived long enough to whisper their stories to the outside world. These were not customs. They were laws, and the first law, the one that governed every single night within these walls, was designed to make love impossible. No woman, no matter how beautiful, no matter how favored, was ever allowed to spend the entire night in the Sultan's bed. Let that settle for a moment. Imagine it. You have been chosen. You have been bathed, perfumed, dressed in garments so delicate they tear at the slightest touch. You have walked the golden road, the secret corridor that leads to his chamber, your heart pounding so loud you're certain the guards can hear it. You enter. You perform. You give everything you have, everything you are, and then, in the dark, when his breathing slows and sleep takes him, a eunuch appears at the door. Silently, he gestures. You rise. You gather your torn silks. You leave. If you stay until dawn, you die. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. This was statecraft. The architects of the harem understood something profound and terrifying. Intimacy is power. A woman who shares a man's bed through the night, who hears his fears in the darkness, who whispers into his ear when he is vulnerable, can shape his thoughts, his decisions, his empire. And so the system severed that possibility at its root. No woman would ever hold the Sultan's heart and mind together. He would remain untouchable, divine, alone. For over 2 centuries, this law held. And then, in 1520, a young woman from the steppes of what is now Ukraine did the unthinkable. Her name was Alexandra Lisovska, though history would come to know her as Hürrem Sultan. And one night, when the eunuch came to collect her, she did not leave. She stayed. She slept beside Suleiman the Magnificent until the call to prayer echoed over the Bosphorus and light poured through the lattice windows. She should have been executed by noon. Instead, she became the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. The shockwave that tore through the harem that morning cannot be overstated. Senior concubines, women who had spent decades perfecting their obedience, who had swallowed their pride and their rage every single night, demanded her head. The Valid Sultan, Suleiman's mother and the iron-fisted ruler of the harem, saw her authority crumbling. Servants whispered in corners. Younger girls looked at Hürrem with something new in their eyes. Hope. Dangerous, destabilizing hope. But Suleiman did not punish her. He protected her, and in doing so, he shattered the oldest pillar of harem control. Hürrem had done what the system was designed to prevent. She had made him love her. But for every woman who dreamed of Hürrem's defiance, there were 1,000 others trapped in a second law, one even more heartbreaking than the first. It was called the one concubine, one son rule, and it turned motherhood into exile. The moment a concubine gave birth to a male heir, she could never share the sultan's bed again. Think about the cruelty of that equation. To bear a son was the ultimate achievement. It elevated you from the masses, gave you wealth, power, a private apartment, servants of your own. You became the mother of a prince, a potential future sultan. But the instant that child drew breath, your intimate life ended. Permanently. You were moved to chambers far from the sultan's quarters, beautiful rooms with no windows facing his. You could wield influence from a distance, maneuver in politics, but you would never again feel his touch. Your body had served its purpose. The empire was finished with that part of you. This law existed for one reason: to prevent civil war. If a single concubine bore multiple sons, she could build a faction around them, a power base that might tear the empire apart. By ensuring every prince had a different mother, the system fractured loyalty, turned potential alliances into rivalries, and kept the throne stable. The empire's survival was built on the isolation of its mothers. For women who bore only daughters, the calculus was different, but no less cruel. They could remain in the rotation, still compete for the sultan's favor, but they lived in constant, suffocating dread that their next child might be male, that their next pregnancy would be their last night of intimacy forever. Some women took desperate measures. Palace records hint at the use of herbs, crude methods to delay conception, dangerous gambles to prolong their access to power. Their bodies became battlefields torn between desire and duty, between survival and obedience. But even before a woman could face that impossible choice, she had to survive something else: the examinations. Palace midwives conducted what were politely called purity inspections, but these were far more invasive than any test of virginity. Women were judged on the symmetry of their faces, the texture of their hair, the scent of their skin after bathing. They were observed while they slept to ensure they did not snore, did not talk, did not move too much in their dreams. Imagine living with the knowledge that a single unconscious sound could end your future. And then there was Sultan Ibrahim the, whose reign in the 1640s descended into madness so bizarre it became legend. After a hunting trip during which he became fixated on the anatomy of a cow, Ibrahim ordered goldsmiths to create models of its hindquarters. He sent these replicas across the empire with a single command: "Find me women who match this shape." Governors mobilized. Searches were conducted. Eventually, a 330-pound Armenian woman was found, renamed Shivakar, and celebrated as a treasure of the empire. Ibrahim's obsession didn't stop there. Convinced that animal furs enhanced his virility, he had the palace lined with pelts. Wolf skins replaced Persian carpets. Bear hides covered the walls. The sultan's chambers became a hunter's den. But Ibrahim's madness was an anomaly. The true machinery of the harem ran with cold, bureaucratic precision, and its most chilling feature was this: every intimate encounter was recorded. In a quiet office lit by oil lamps, a palace scribe would dip his quill into ink and reduce a night of supposed passion to a single line in a ledger. The date, the woman's name, the outcome. This was not romance. This was documentation. The empire kept receipts, and those receipts were used to settle disputes over succession, to confirm paternity, to prevent any woman from lying about her access to power. The consequences for defying the schedule were absolute. One of Suleiman's own wives, Gulfem Hatun, was executed for selling her appointed knight to another concubine. She had tried to turn intimacy into currency, and the state responded by making her an example. The message was clear: your body is not yours to trade. It belongs to the empire. But the fact that women were willing to risk death to buy and sell these knights reveals something devastating. In a world where access to the sultan was the only path to survival, Intimacy had become the ultimate black market commodity. An underground economy thrived in the shadows, where jewelry was traded for a single night, where alliances were forged and broken over a place in the rotation. And all of it was watched. The Sultan's chambers were not designed for privacy. They were designed for surveillance. Hidden corridors called secret roads allowed eunuchs to move silently through the walls, their footsteps muffled by thick carpets, their presence known to no one but the Valid Sultan. Windows were angled not for beauty, but for observation. The famous Iznik tiles that covered the walls, shimmering in blues and greens, were polished to a mirror shine. They reflected every movement, caught every gesture. The architecture itself was a spy, and at the center of this web sat the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who managed the harem with the precision of a general. She tracked menstrual cycles, pregnancies, and availability on detailed charts, treating women's bodies like strategic resources. At the beginning of each month, she would reveal the new rotation in a ritual that was equal parts ceremony and psychological warfare. The chosen women would gather in silence as the Valid Sultan distributed silk handkerchiefs. A handkerchief embroidered with gold thread meant immediate access, the pinnacle of favor. A plain white cloth meant exile, a fall from grace that could last months or forever. It was theater, it was control, and it was unrelenting. Before a woman entered the Sultan's chamber, she underwent days of preparation that stripped away everything she had been and rebuilt her as something else entirely. She was moved to an isolation room, cut off from the rest of the harem, where attendants began the meticulous process of transformation. Hours of ritual bathing in scented water, skin massaged with oils from Persia and Arabia, hair combed until it shone like black silk under lamplight. But this was not luxury. This was purification. She was being transformed from a person into an offering. She was dressed in single-use garments of the finest silk, so delicate they would tear at the slightest pressure. These clothes, once worn into the Sultan's chamber, would never be worn again. They were either destroyed or locked away as relics, tangible proof that the transaction had been completed. The empire documented everything, even fabric. The walk to the Sultan's chamber was called the Golden Road, but there was nothing golden about the experience. It was a silent procession through winding passageways designed to disorient, to isolate, to remind the woman that she was leaving the world she knew and entering a space where different rules applied. The only sounds were the soft slap of her slippers on marble and the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the eunuchs who flanked her. Every turn of the corridor took her deeper into silence, deeper into fear. When she finally arrived at the Sultan's door, a final set of instructions would be whispered. She was to enter the chamber and crawl to the foot of the bed. She could not turn her back on the Sultan, for fear she might conceal a weapon. She could not speak unless spoken to. She could not sigh too heavily, could not express pleasure or pain too loudly, could not do anything that might suggest she had desires of her own. She was an instrument, and instruments do not have feelings. But how could any human being perform such flawless submission? The answer lay in the 2 years of relentless training that came before this night. New arrivals to the harem were taught poetry, music, languages, and etiquette, but the most important lessons were never written down. Elderly concubines, women whose hearts had turned to stone after decades in the system, instructed the young girls in what palace records euphemistically called the intimate arts. These were not lessons in pleasure. They were lessons in performance, in survival. The girls were taught how to read the Sultan's mood from the smallest twitch of his brow, how to mirror his desires without appearing too eager, how to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. Most importantly, they were taught how to fake devotion while keeping their true selves locked away in a place no one could ever reach. Emotion was dangerous. Attachment was lethal. The women who survived were the ones who learned to perform love without ever feeling it. By the end of their training, these women could produce tears on command, could smile through heartbreak, could make their bodies respond in ways that had nothing to do with what they actually felt. It was acting elevated to an art form, and the stage was a bed. The price of a bad performance was exile or death. The final test was a chilling examination before a panel of senior harem officials. Candidates were required to demonstrate their skills in simulated encounters, their movements and expressions judged as if intimacy were nothing more than a theater production. It was humiliating. It was dehumanizing. And it was mandatory. And even after all that training, even after a real encounter with the Sultan, there was no moment of privacy, no chance to collect oneself. Immediately after leaving his chamber, the woman was escorted by waiting eunuchs to a medical examination room. Within hours, her body was inspected for any sign of pregnancy. Her worth was measured not by her experience, not by her feelings, but by whether she might bear a child. If she was pregnant, her status changed overnight. If she was not, she returned to the rotation, to wait and prepare for the next time her name was called. This entire system was designed with surgical precision to prevent genuine love from taking root. To show real affection for the Sultan was considered a threat, a sign of personal loyalty that could undermine the absolute loyalty owed to the state. Women who displayed authentic emotion, who seemed too attached, too invested, were quietly removed from the rotation. Sometimes they were reassigned to other duties within the palace. Sometimes they simply disappeared. The harem itself became a hive of surveillance, where senior concubines were expected to report on the younger ones, and new arrivals were encouraged to expose the mistakes of their rivals. Every smile could be evidence of conspiracy. Every whispered conversation could be twisted into betrayal. Friendships were poisoned by suspicion. Trust became a luxury no one could afford. Within this culture of fear, a desperate underground economy flourished. Women who had fallen out of favor sold their jewelry to bribe eunuchs or influence the Valid Sultan's decisions. Others used their scheduled nights as bargaining chips in complex political games, trading access to the Sultan for protection, for favors, for the survival of family members outside the palace walls. It was a dangerous market, and the execution of Gulfem Hatun served as a permanent, terrifying reminder of what happened when the transactions were discovered. Beauty itself became another battlefield, and the weapons were brutal. Women smeared their faces with lead-based powders to achieve the pale, luminous skin that was fashionable, ignoring the fact that the toxins burned their flesh and slowly poisoned their blood. They rubbed mercury compounds into their cheeks for a permanent blush, trading their long-term health for a fleeting advantage in the hierarchy of desire. They starved themselves to maintain the fragile, delicate silhouettes that were prized, fainting during encounters not from passion, but from malnutrition and toxic beauty rituals. Even their food was controlled. Palace physicians designed meal plans that shifted with the political needs of the empire. When heirs were wanted, women were fed fertility-enhancing foods, aphrodisiacs, and nutrient-rich dishes. When the empire had enough princes, contraceptive herbs were mixed into their meals without their knowledge or consent. Every bite they ate was dictated by forces beyond their control. Their bodies were not their own. They never had been. The harem was never merely a prison for women. It was a gilded cage for everyone within its walls. The eunuchs who guarded the Sultan's secrets were prisoners too, their loyalty ensured by mutilation, their lives erased beyond the palace gates. Even the Sultan, the empire's center of power, was ensnared by his own machinery of control, unable to trust love, unable to feel intimacy, surrounded by hundreds yet utterly alone. Only a few, like Hurrem Sultan, dared to break the system's chains. Her defiance of the overnight rule transformed her from slave to sovereign, rewriting what power could mean for a woman in an empire built on obedience. But her triumph was rare. For every Hurrem, thousands more vanished, silenced, dismissed, forgotten. Topkapi Palace still stands, its marble and tiles gleaming, its silence heavy with memory. Tourists wander its corridors unaware that every stone was once part of a mechanism that regulated desire and erased identity. And in one quiet room, a torn fragment of paper remains. 3 faded rules, written 5 centuries ago. They were never meant to be merciful. They were meant to be obeyed, and for centuries they were.